time, and my classes start on time. Some people are come in a little bit late, which is fine because I set it up in such a way that they can come in without my help. So one of the reasons I'm assuming that some of you have signed up for this class is that you're interested and love history, and you appreciate how important the character of Alexander the Great is, even until today. All generals want to replicate the success of his conquests, and they want to be beloved by their soldiers. And then some of you are with me today because Hanukkah is the holiday that celebrates, actually it celebrates the Maccabees winning a war against the Greeks, but really that's kind of a falsehood. The Maccabees and the Hanukkah story is in fact a story about a civil war between city-fied cosmopolitan Jews that wanted to be Greek and countryside Jews that wanted them to not be so Greek. They were threatened by Greek culture. So as you know, in the United States and in many locales all over the world, those people that are the most liberal-minded, the blue states in our case, are usually on the coast. And they're usually on the coast because they have a lot of interaction with people coming from other cultures and countries. So they feel that the culture that they're living in is enlarged by other people bringing new ideas to their older culture. So they see it as an opportunity to grow, whereas other people see this as a threat. So let's see, I'm going to mute everyone again because I want to be sure that nothing's interrupted as we begin. So the main focus of my talk today really, and as you know, I'm a storyteller. I'm a humanities teacher, I'm a storyteller. And today I'm going to tell you the story of why the Asians, and in particular the Jewish people, were so enamored by Greek culture and why they wanted so much to make their understanding and their religious beliefs that are rooted in the Jewish Bible. They wanted to expand their life experience and to be more and more Hellenized, as the ancient name for Greece was Hellas at some point. So we forever call it the city of Helen. Athens is the city of Helen. And the process of becoming a Grecophile, you become Hellenized. Now, why is it that it appealed so much to the Jewish people? I'm going to give you lots and lots of examples and show you some beautiful paintings. And one of the reasons that we have so many paintings related to the stories of the Greeks and the world of the Greeks is that for many thousands of years, there were only one or two categories of art that had the highest prestige, and they were called history paintings. So they were history paintings of important events in history and of important people. All other art forms like landscape painting, still life, French Impressionism, did not have any kind of prestige until they won it. They fought for it. The French Impressionists fought for that prestige. And so they changed the way that the art world was going to operate. And it started to reflect the lives of everyday people, not just history paintings, which were designed to make pictures of Greek and Roman myths, of Old and New Testament stories. And there were portraits of people that were significant, like Henry VIII, for example, or Queen Elizabeth. So the average person didn't count. Now, one of the big reasons, so that's one of the reasons why we're going to see a lot of paintings that were made throughout history, because this was the category that was the most revered. Consequently, artists wanted to be successful. They followed the rules. They painted history paintings. But as a benefit to us, we have an illustration of stories that bring everything to life. That's the whole purpose of art, is to bring the words of someone's philosophy to life. Okay, so let's talk about philosophy. The philosophy of the Jewish people and origin stories across the world generally tell you what is the dominant philosophy of that culture. Everyone lives under a certain style government that has a dominant philosophy. The dominant philosophy in the United States is all men are created equal. That is the dominant philosophy of America. All men are created equal, when we know good and well that they're not. But it is the ideal that we aspire to. And that's why there are so many changes that continue to happen in America, because more and more people that have been scandalized in past years, that have been brutalized in past years, say in the gay community, have a seat at the table. Everybody wants a seat at the table because they're human beings and they want respect. And this is the reason why the American Constitution is such a powerful one, or the Declaration of Independence. Why it's a powerful entity is that we do try to live up to that ideal. But mind you, at the time that the Jewish people wrote the Bible, and at the time that the Greeks and other people were able to start to document what their philosophical ideas were, was when the alphabet was invented. The alphabet was invented in the part of the world that is known as Phoenicia. So Lebanon, Israel, Syria, that's where the alphabet was invented. So it became the alphabet. And after that moment in history, 800 years BCE, people could document what their philosophies were. And this is about the time that we start to get the stories of the Trojan War. So we start to get these ideas, also kind of the transmission of the philosophical ideals of the Greek people. So what are their philosophical ideals? In the Jewish world, the philosophy was God is everything and mankind must follow God's rules. It was a God-centric universe. It was a God-centric way of making the world make sense. God was in charge. He tells you to build an ark, you build an ark. But he's a God that practices tough love. He loves you. He's everywhere. He knows everything. He wants everything good for his people. But if you don't do what he instructs you to do or commands you to do, he will burn down your town. He will turn your wife into a pillar of salt. He will bring a flood that will destroy almost everyone. This is a worldview. That is the philosophy of the Jewish religion. God will protect you as long as you follow the rules. In the Greek world, it was significantly different. In the Greek world, their dominant philosophy was man is the measure of all things. It was a man-centric universe. It was the world in which they said the Greek gods never die. They're immortal. They have blue blood. They're immortals. They never get sick. They never die. They will always be here. And they never feel any kind of pain or remorse or anything. And all the world is at their feet. They are people that never have to pay for any consequence. They can intervene in people's lives, come down from Mount Olympus, intervene in people's lives, make people's lives miserable, play a ridiculous soap opera chess game on this planet, in which they intervene in people's lives and do whatever they wish to work out their jealousies and their rage and whatever emotions they have against other gods. So they pit mankind against each other for their entertainment. They have to pay for no consequence whatsoever, but mankind pays. Not only do we have to face the fact that we are mortals from the time we're 10 years old, not only do we have to live with the reality that one day we will die, we still want to write epic poetry. We still want to make beautiful buildings and gardens, and we want to still evolve as human beings. We want to make our life meaningful. We contribute in such a glorious way that the liberal arts, the humanities, which I teach about, tell you about all the beautiful things that mankind has ever invented to make our life that much more glorious and enjoyable. So this is what they did. They completely inverted the paradigm. And the paradigm was that man is the measure of all things because he's so creative, he's so capable of not only coming up with creative ideas, but executing them and making them a reality. That mankind can do so many things so well that it elevated the status of man almost to a godlike position. They made their gods into silly men, and they made their men into gods. Do you understand how critical this is? This is telling people that they have choices. They have choices. They don't just have to follow everything by rote. But that's not to say that Jews wanted to give up their religion. They didn't. They wanted to create a hybrid religion because they liked both aspects of it. And both aspects had their own gifts to give. The effect of this is going to be earth-shattering because there is not one single place on this planet that has an association with European conquest or Europe in general, whether it's South America or Central America or the United States or Canada or all kinds of places all over the world where they've been touched by these ideas that are humanistic from the Greeks, that the whole world that is Western is Hellenized. The whole world has been Hellenized that holds to the same ideas that we do, because who can look down upon a great idea? Who can say that this is not an exceptional addition to people's lives? Now, the way that they organize this philosophy is, as I said, everything begins with the crown jewel, and the crown jewel is the philosophical ideal that is part of your nation's structure. In their case, when they said that man is the measure of all things, how do you make that a reality? How do you make that meaningful in any way? Actually, it's been interpreted in many ways. I'm just interpreting it in one way, that man can accomplish so much, he's extraordinary. But when you say that mankind is capable of such things, and you tell mankind that they have choices to make in their life, the way that they brought philosophy to the average man was, like most people do, they told stories. They told stories. That's how you make something tangible for the average man. You tell stories. We tell very different stories in the West than they do in the Arab countries that are following Sharia law. In America, we can tell the story of Romeo and Juliet. They are the quiet heroes of that story. They have to die for various reasons we can discuss another time. But we can tell a story where the family is going to come together when the children's lives are at stake. A mother, even if she doesn't want her child to marry someone, when the baby's born, oh, grandma, forget it. Everybody's okay. Everybody wants the baby. In the Arab world, can you tell a story like that? No. The minute a girl even looks at a boy, she's thrown down a well. This is a very important thing to understand. The West has the ability to think freely because of our inculcation into this Greek state of mind. So they told stories. And what's another way that you bring stories to life? You do illustrations. You make illustrations. You make sculpture. You make architecture. All of these things are representing your ideals. All of these things in their time and place are representing the big talking points of that period. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to cover a lot of territory because you have to understand how the economics of all countries, the politics, the art, the thinking, everything is connected. Everything is codependent. There's nothing that just dangles out there for no reason at all. It's all interconnected. And at the end of the class, we might have an opportunity to ask a few questions as well, so that if I haven't clarified something, you might want to jot it down, just make a quick note to yourself. But what I'm going to do at this point is I want you to shake your head and tell me if you see Alexander the Great there on your screen. Yes? So I'm going to completely take my picture away here in just 1 second so that nothing interferes with your vision. Let's see now. Yes. This gets a little tricky, but here we are. So Alexander the Great and the Hellenization of ancient Israel. This lecture then is going to highlight the critical moments in Jewish history, but it's in fact the history of Asia Minor. And then we're going to talk about an expansive period in which the Jewish history and the Greek history are going to intersect at various periods. Now, as we said, in the Jewish world, mankind is born into a universe in which we don't know exactly where we're coming from. We don't know where we're going, but we know that there is a God that loves us and wants us to have an excellent experience. Again, it's kind of law-driven. There are 613 commandments. And as a consequence of that, to be a very good person that is following Jewish law, you must follow a lot of the commandments, as some of them don't apply necessarily because we don't have a temple anymore in Jerusalem in the way that we did before. This was a worldview in which we gave a lot of respect to God, and it was significantly different than what happened in the Greek world, as we said. This is Zeus and his wife Hera. They will forever be in their 40s, and all of the other gods will forever be in their 20s. They will never have anything harsh or horrible happen to them. They're untouchable, and they are powerful depending on which part of the universe they control. In the case of Poseidon, he controls the waters. Now, essentially what we have then to begin this intro in Jewish ideology is that one of the important things that we must all be aware of always is that constructs, whether they're political or they are cultural or religious, they are designed to control violence. I don't think people think about this very much, but it is in fact a critical role that is played when laws are written, or even say the 10 Commandments, which are the first primary laws that were given to the Jewish people. So we know that people in general tend to have an ego, a large ego. It helps us survive. The id and the ego help us survive. But we are told immediately by God's laws that we shall have no other gods before us, which is to say that there is something more powerful than we are. Consequently, we are destined to be a little bit more humble because there is something bigger than we are that controls our lives. The other thing that starts that we are told is, of course, to have a holy day, which we set aside for God, again, to laud this entity that is far more powerful than we are. We are to honor our mother and father, because if we don't, this will bring about violence. This has potential to bring about violence, in the same way that if we kill, if we commit adultery, if we steal, if we bear false witness, if we covet something that someone else has, all of these things have the potential to create violence if we act on them. Consequently, we know that this is a dire warning for a culture to be able to continue to live, because violence always begets more and more violence. Then there must be control over such things. Therefore, the Jewish world is full of laws that we must follow, but the Greek world has a more open view. The first big view that we said, that man is the measure of all things, is just one of their ideologies that make them humanistic. But they tell us the unexamined life is not worth living. If you are not being introspective and calculating your interactions with people and thinking if you acted in the best way possible, etc., if you are not doing these kinds of things, you are not evolving as a person. They taught this absolute love for excellence in everything, excellence in the beauty of the human body, so that being a warrior and having a muscular body and a defined body was something that they held as one of the ideals. This is one of the things they always aspire to. They aspire to excellence in intellect, excellence in everything. And they said that a self-actualized person is one who has compassion for others. But I must tell you that they even went a little further than that. They said a person that reaches his highest apotheosis as a human being is a person that has compassion for his enemies' grief and pain. If you can even imagine this, that the person that has the highest level of apotheosis as a human being is the one that has compassion for his enemy's pain, not even his own. When they followed up these ideas in the stories, naturally, they were going to tell a story that would absolutely break your heart. And what is this story? The Trojan War that took place about 3,300 years ago. In the Trojan War, one of the ways that they kind of fashioned this story, this war did actually happen. It happened many times over, but this is the famous one that we discuss. What they're telling you, it was a war of brother against brother. At this time in history, the city-states here did not see themselves as a unit. In fact, they were constantly having battles against each other. But the Greek people themselves that originated from this part of the world went to different locations because the country of Athens is not good for agriculture, and consequently they literally could not feed themselves. So they had to go to other territories to commandeer places where they could grow enough food and have the kind of to sustain their lives. But the other reason why the Greeks are here is because the great empires that are going to continue to conquer them and will eventually conquer various territories that we'll see momentarily, even though the Greeks are holding them back here, they will conquer them at some point. But this is the only safety net that the Greek mainlanders have. They must keep their people here all the time so that they can hold back the invaders that covered so much territory. So this way of telling a story in which this is a civil war of two city-states against another city-state, the Trojans were also Greeks, we are told about and we make contrast because, as I said, the Greek world is all about choices. And this is a fundamental difference from all other nations at this time, because most people in the world were slaves to a king emperor. When these stories were being told and later recorded, almost all people in the world were owned by someone that had immense power. These stories are going to tell you what happens when a young man makes certain choices, and then his counterpart in the Odyssey, an older man who has lived 20 more years and has had a lot of life experience already, what does he do? So the first story is the story of Achilles, and in the story of the Iliad. Again, all of these are choices. What happens with Achilles is he's a young man who cannot control his emotions. He's the guy that goes out drinking on a motorcycle, and he is the greatest warrior to come from the Greek mainland. He has come to Troy to help the Greeks destroy the Trojans. And when they destroy them, they're going to burn their city down. This is the way things were done. He's a young man that is full of something in vinegar. And as you know, he's going to act in the same way that a young man does. He's going to get in lots of different troubles and skirmishes. But what happens in the Trojan War, which takes 10 years for the Greek mainlanders to win, is about 9 months before this 10-year period is up, they finally win one battle because they cannot breach the walls of the Trojan city-state. It's so powerfully protected. But 9 months before, they do win a battle, and there are spoils of war to be divided. This is supposedly Achilles here. And this is one of the benefits of winning a war. You acquire women and children as slaves. This woman was awarded to Achilles as a gift for him being such a good warrior. She's going to be his concubine. But the king of Mycenae, one of the city-states, says, no, I will have her. Since he has prestige and power more than the soldier does, she must go with him. This young man then becomes so enraged, even though there are hundreds of other women he could have, hundreds. No, he must have only her. As a consequence of that, he goes into his tent and sulks for days and won't come out. At which point his best friend, Patroclus, says to him, why don't you at least give me your armor and I will go out there and fight and they will think it's you. But they know by his tactics, soldiering on the field, that it's not Achilles, because Achilles was a unique soldier. So he is almost immediately killed in battle. He was sulking in his tent this whole time. He doesn't think now that maybe a rational person would say, this is my fault. It's absolutely not what he does. And it's not what a young man would typically do. He becomes so enraged by the fact that his best friend from childhood and his lover and his soulmate, etc., is killed, that his rage explodes to the extent that there is no end to his fury. Eventually, what happens with him is he is able to kill the prince of Troy. These are the Trojan walls that are so well fortified. One of the princes of this principality comes out, and Achilles takes his body, attaches it to his chariot, and continues to ride around the walls of Troy to show that he is the man. He's the man that's been able to bring this man to this kind of treacherous situation, and he owns his body. That's how he's going to have a catharsis. He's going to destroy this man's body. The king of Priam begs him for his son's body back so that he can rest peacefully in the underworld, in Hades. But Achilles, because his ego has still not diminished in any way, absolutely refuses to do so. When the king eventually, when his son's body is so destroyed that it's literally a few pieces of bone, he comes again and begs Achilles to give him his son's remains so that he can rest in peace. And Achilles acquiesces. He makes the choice to acquiesce and give this king his son. The highest apotheosis of a human being. And they both cry together for their common sorrows. The counterpart, because we know that a man that lives by the sword will die by the sword, the counterpart is Odysseus. Odysseus is in his 40s. He's a king of Ithaca. He's very crafty and clever. He comes up with the concept of the Trojan horse. Since he knows the Trojans were, one of their gods were horses, and consequently, he has the Greek mainlanders build this Trojan horse with a trap door in it. And the Trojans essentially say, we've been fighting this war for 10 years. We're going back home. This is our gift to you. We acquiesce to you. And at night, of course, the Greek soldiers from the mainland let themselves out of the trap door and they burn the city down. Odysseus is going to have 16 or 17 stops on his way home from Troy. It's going to take him at least 10 more years. For 8.5 years, he's imprisoned, shall we say, by the goddess Calypso, who wants to keep him as her husband or her boy toy or whatever it is that she wants. 8.5 years, she keeps him there. He keeps begging to go back home, and she says to him, well, you know that if you leave this goddess that I am, then you will not have immortality. You know that. And he prefers to go home. Again, another lesson. It is worthwhile to be a human, though we know our fate, because this is the choice we make. Again, he has these adventures with Cyclopses, with various adventures on the waterways. He really should have gotten home in about 1.5 years from Troy to Ithaca, where he's the king. If he had gone by sea and by land, the most it would have taken him would be 1.5 years. But he's a typical man and refuses to ask for directions. Just kidding, of course. But what happens here is he is thrown from pillar to post because he does some things that are not altogether appropriate, though he doesn't do completely ridiculous things. He immediately acquiesces to the gods on the waterways or to kings or whoever he encounters, because he understands that if you are a stranger in a strange land, you must follow the rules of the land that is trying to help you and the people that are trying to help you survive. Sure enough, he eventually does come home after 20 years. His son is overwrought with emotion. His wife, Penelope, is so happy to have him back home. And now he's been installed again as the king of Ithaca. He is a man that has a lot of sense and is capable to get out of a lot of problems because of his diplomatic skills. This is a man much to be admired. This is why he's rewarded with life. Now, at the very same time that Trojan War was taking place, Israel was quite an interesting entity unto itself. About 3,000 years ago, the 12 tribes of Israel had their own city-states in which they were the kings, essentially. They were the kings of their individual city-states, the sons of Jacob, who will in later years in the Torah become known as Israel. But about 3,000 years ago, King Saul is the first king of Israel who becomes enormously wealthy. And this is David, who is going to be the soldier that will become so well known for having been a poet and a warrior. And he's, I guess, the Jewish Achilles in many ways, because not only does he become an extremely important military man, he will also have his misadventures in romance and other good adventures that get him into trouble as well. But he becomes the leader of the Israelites, and his reputation continues to grow. I mean, he's known the world over as this important king in Israel. He, in many ways, is mirroring the Iliad because he's this great warrior. It just so happens that about 30 years ago, there was an archaeological find in Damascus in which they were telling this story of King David. After King David, we have King Solomon, who becomes so wealthy that he is able to build the first Jewish temple. And this Jewish temple was designed to make sacrifices, just like the Greeks. They made sacrifices. Jews made sacrifices to the gods, and the smoke from the sacrifices was supposed to reach up to God. And all of these prayers were supposed to be answered because they were honoring God. Solomon built this temple in which the Kohanim, who were the priests, and the Levites, who were always the musicians and the singers, would have these kind of special moments for Jewish holidays. And this is the inauguration, the dedication of the temple. The temple, as you can see, because Solomon was so wealthy, was covered in gold. This was a very clever move because the temples were also the treasuries. And if you melt down the gold coin you have, or any kind of gold, and you attach it to walls, nobody's going to steal it from you. It was, though, as the Torah said, whatever temple you build must be decorated to the extent that you can afford and as elaborate. So we can see that there's a lot going on here that the Jewish people are partaking of even more than 3,000 years ago. But as most people are, they don't get along. Those 10 tribes of Israel that are living in this part of the world become known as Israel, though all of them are the sons of Jacob. They will refer to themselves as Israel. And then the 2 tribes that still remain here around Jerusalem, I believe it is around Jerusalem, though I don't see it there, they are the 2 tribes that are not absorbed into the Assyrian Empire. In the year 700 before the Common Era, the king Sargon, who is an Assyrian connected to Syria, had conquered this much territory. Everyone always conquers this territory. They must have access for economic reasons to Asia. This is the Levant. Everyone must have this territory, and they must have the wheat fields of Egypt to feed their armies. This is a critical thing. Always, always, always here you will see that someone very powerful is controlling this territory. The 10 tribes of Israel are absorbed into the Assyrian Empire because there's no such thing as anti-Semitism. If you pay tribute to Sargon, he doesn't care which religion you practice. In fact, the more gods, the better. What's wrong with having even more gods? The possibility is that you'll have more protection. But there was no issue of the number of gods. And in fact, people that have one god are far more dangerous than people that have many gods, because they become very contentious if you don't believe in that one god. Well, the 2 tribes then remain here. But as I said, what continues over and over and over again is now you have another more powerful emperor, Nebuchadnezzar, of which there were many Nebuchadnezzar. And you know that Verdi opera Nabucco is about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the one at this point, the second, that conquers the Assyrians, and he absorbs more territories. And he eventually also begins to absorb the last two tribes of Israel that are living here. And all of them are transferred as slaves, essentially, as collateral damage as a result of the war that they lost. They go to the Babylonian Empire. And as was done so often, is their temple is burned to the ground. Because it is burned to the ground, and because Jews begin to have prominence in this part of the world, and they will forever be in all parts of Asia till 1970, or initially 1948, but for sure 1970, the last of the Jews will leave Persia. But what happens as a result of the loss of this temple is that the Jews not only become slaves in the Babylonian Empire and then the Persian Empire. Again, the Persians conquer the Babylonians, is that they constantly ask to go back to Israel and rebuild their temple. They're begging Nebuchadnezzar to build the temple. As it is, Nebuchadnezzar died before this could happen, but he did give them permission, and his son Cyrus, I believe, or no, Darius maybe. Yeah. I beg your pardon. It was Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great, he permits the Jews to go back to Israel, and they are always begging to go back, but only a small number of Jews went back to Israel, the territory which we know is Israel now around Jerusalem, because they had such a good life. They were highly educated and they were given superb jobs and had a very good life under the Persian Empire for hundreds of years. Now, Cyrus the Great lets them go back, and they build just one part of this enormous reconstruction, which will actually happen around the time of Christ. All of these additional buildings, all of these fortresses, and so on, most of them will be built through the years, but the big complex that we know as the Second Temple, and the elaborate Second Temple was paid for right around the time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago, by Herod the Great. Okay, but at this point, we only have sort of one building, and the Jews now, they have not such a great complex, but they have their temple back. And that temple, like the first temple, stood for some 500 years without being destroyed until the Roman era. In the year 70 AD, or Common Era, the Romans conquer the Jews, and they destroy the whole Second Temple. Everything here is destroyed. The only thing that remains from Herod's big accomplishment is some of the fortification walls, which is the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Those are just some of the fortification walls. Now, again, what is happening here? This is the 6th century before the Common Era, so it's 500 years BCE, 2,500 years ago. What is going on at the same time that all of this is taking place, where they are rebuilding the Second Temple, is that the Greeks institute a new style of government called democracy. It is born in Athens. And in fact, all of the people and all of the core people from the humanities, which we see in, say, paintings by Raphael, all of the core people that are the Greek scientists and philosophers and mathematicians, and we think they're Greek, but they came from all over, everywhere imaginable, because they loved the philosophy of democracy. They loved the idea that you can think freely. And because this was such a boost to the world, because again, most everyone in the world are slaves, people who have no rights, since everything begins with a new philosophy, then Plato and Aristotle are at the center of this work, and they are the largest figures They are the ones among the many hundreds, if not thousands of people that started to come to Athens because you could think freely, you could speak freely, and you could create the kind of world that we have today with the humanities. Just like people that go to New York, all of the crazy, gay, transgender, whatever you want to know, all of the crazies that are in New York are the ones that make art. They are the ones that are caught between a real world and a fantasy world and a world that they can create that's a better world. All of these artisans, scientists, philosophers, tragedians, comics, everybody imaginable came to Athens because it was the center of a new style of government where the average man could have a say-so in his destiny. They gave birth to all these wonderful things and more. The effect of this was profound. How can you not like this? Well, when the Persian Empire, at a certain point, if you remember just moments before, I showed you that the Greeks were holding back the Persians here. That at a certain point, they're going to lose that position. And the Persian Empire will be so powerful, so wealthy, that not only will it absorb all of these various territories, this is where Troy took place, the Trojan War, they're going to absorb part of Macedonia, and they now want to make an incursion into Europe. This was in the year 490 BCE. The Persian Empire is so strong, and they want to attack Athens because Athens is one of the wealthiest and strongest city-states, but also because Athens has a democracy which is 17 years old at this point. And because it's 17 years old, this huge incursion of the army of Persia, which has hundreds of thousands of soldiers that must fight for the king. They have no choice. They all belong to the king. But the Athenians do have a choice, and they make the choice to fight. Even though they know they will be outnumbered by ridiculous numbers. What you can see that is happening here, they're going to be attacked in 490 BCE in this little town outside of Athens called Marathon. The Battle of Marathon is going to take place. These are the Greek ships that they have there. No, I beg your pardon. These are the Persian ships, because the Greeks are going to build better ships to sink the Persian ships later, 10 years later. So these are the Persian ships that came across the waterways to attack these Greeks that came from all manner of city-states. You can see by their shields. They come from all city-states imaginable to fight, and this is what they look like going up against the Persians, who are enormously well suited for war. They've taken over so many thousands of acres, but they see that the Athenians and other city-states are fierce. And the Persians were afraid of salt water. They thought that demons lived in salt water, so their navy was absolutely useless. This is the reason why their ships in perfect and pristine shape made their way to the shores of Athens, but everybody was terrified of the crossing. Well, when the Athenians and these other soldiers realized that this was their greatest fear, they're later going to play on the fact that the Persians are terrified of the oceans. The Battle of Marathon was essentially it could easily be said, the Battle of Marathon was like America attacking Cuba, and Cuba could hold us back. The Persians that survived this went back to Persia, but there was no way that the Persian king was going to let this stand. This was such a huge insult that 10 years later, we now have another king in place, and his name is Xerxes, who in the Jewish world is known as Achashverosh. And Achashverosh was very good to the Jews, like most every other Persian emperor king was. And the story of Esther and the Persian king who let the Jews live because Haman wanted to kill them. This is a story that is always celebrated on a holiday in the spring called Purim. What is going on, though, in the Greek world is they know good and well that the Persian Empire is not going to let an insult like that stand. That the great Persian Empire, this is going to get out all over the world, that the great Persian Empire was held back by the Greeks. It was laughable. But as I said, this golden age of Greece, which happens because of the democratic ideals that are taking place here, attracts the finest leaders because everyone wants to be part of this new style of government and this new age. So one of those great statesmen, generals, and leaders was Pericles, and another colleague of his was a man called Themistocles. They knew that the Persians would not stand for this, and sure enough, 10 years later, the Greeks came back even more powerful with the support of even Sparta. The Xerxes, who has a negative connotation in the Greek world, but has a positive connotation in the Jewish world, said to the Greeks, we're here for blood, and we will have so many soldiers on horseback that are expert archers that the way that we attack you is with hundreds of thousands of arrows coming your way, one after another, so much that it will darken your sky. And Pericles said, then we shall fight in the shade. In that 480 now, because we're moving forward in time, that 10 years period, then we have these two major battles. And the major battles take place on land in Thermopylae and on sea in Salamis. The Straits of Salamis. Because the Greeks knew that, yes, on land, the Persians would surely do them damage because hundreds and thousands of men against hundreds of men is different. But they knew that their weakness was the ocean and salt water, and so they did defeat them in the here in the Straits of Salamis. Because the Persians got to Athens first, they burned down the city, as we said. But for that 10-year period, the Greeks had figured out a way that they could sink almost every Persian ship that they could come to. They created these kind of boats that had a nose that would T-bone the other ships coming from across the water, and they would sink them. This is a great moment because democracy was saved. Because democracy was saved, there are acknowledgments everywhere of the oarsmen and of those naval officers that led the Athenians and other Greek city-states to victory. Themistocles then was also a very important figure because in this democracy, he was one of the first non-aristocratic politicians who rose to prominence. And of course, this shows you that a person that is not an aristocrat, or perhaps a landowner or someone that's well-feted and well-placed, can become much more than he could have anywhere else. This is why he insisted on the vision that he had, in which they would build a memorial to democracy. But it's not only a memorial to democracy, It was a memorial to that first philosophy, and that is man is the measure of all things. They put this building up on a stone mountain that was 50 stories tall, not because it was easy, because it was hard. Is it any wonder that we aspire to the same glorious history? Is it any wonder that we want to model ourselves after the Greeks and the Roman Empire? Well, the Persian Empire was vast and it continued to grow, as we said, and they did want to make incursions into Europe. But what happened in the year 300 or so BCE, 400 BCE, in this fourth decade before the Common Era, is that Philip of Macedon, who is the father of Alexander the Great, with his brutality tactics, he was able to unify the city-states of Greece, and he was an exceptional leader for Macedon. He sent his son to Greece for various reasons, but what happened with Alexander the Great, because he was held hostage for a while, whatever, I mean, we can talk about that some other time, but his teacher was Aristotle. His teacher was Aristotle, the man that you see here. His teacher was Aristotle, and he so fell in love, Alexander the Great so fell in love with the humanities and all things Greek. It was not only that he is already dressed in Greek attire, not only did he want to be Greek, but he wanted the whole world to be Greek. And what happened when his father was mysteriously assassinated at the age of 20, he became the commander of his father's former troops, including all of the other young men that wanted to follow this man that already had a reputation for breaking a wild horse, and he was seen to be as this superior alpha male at the age of 20. He got together with his men that came from various territories and city-states, and he crossed this Granicus River, and he had 3 quick battles in 1 year where he pushed back the Persians, the Persian army and Persian strongholds here, in Granicus, in Gordium, and in Issos. Well, the Xerxes was in Persepolis. He was in what we know today is the capital of Iran, Tehran. He was here. And when he heard that this young man had already taken over this much territory, he thought perhaps this young man's ego will be quelled very quickly. But what proved to happen next, which was even more frightening for the Persians, was that he left his men everywhere. Alexander the Great, by the way, wherever he went, he left his men to commandeer these capital cities. This territory was so vast, there were many capital cities. He left his men here to start building schools, theaters, to do everything that they could to inculcate these people that were living under the Persian Empire to become Grecophiles, to turn them into Hellenist admirers. Over a 13-year period, he managed to do this kind of work all over the Persian Empire. Everywhere he went, he had Greek institutions built, and they became very important strongholds that brought about eventually the Islamic Golden Age, because so many documents, so many texts and codices and various things that were available here, maps of the world, were all protected by the Byzantines. And it's astonishing what happened here because of Alexander the Great. But he knew that one of the most critical things that he had to do was he had to secure the wheat fields of Egypt, and he had to have access to this waterway immediately. And the city of Tyre, which was owned at this time, was a Jewish city. They attempted to fight against Alexander the Great, and he annihilated them. When this information got out that they were willing to build these towers over a 7 or 8 month period, that's how long they were willing to wait to crush the people of Tyre and their fortification walls. By the time that Alexander the Great did take control of this Sinai area and Egypt, and they finally made their way to Jerusalem, not a word was spoken. He simply walked into the temple, and everyone knew they were going to be Greeks. They were going to be commandeered by the Greeks. There was no way that they would ever fight an army like his, because his army so much admired him. They were willing to die for him at a moment's notice, but they were so excellently trained, and they had the best armor of this period in history. Well, this is Alexander the Great in the Temple of Jerusalem, where he's welcomed in, and he's shown the Torah, and he has great respect for all cultures. He just wants all of the cultures to be hybrid cultures. It's okay with him, whoever you pray to, as long as you pay your taxes. And this was true for everyone that conquered these territories. They let everyone pray to the God of their understanding at no matter. Then after he makes his way from this part of the world into Egypt, they crown him Pharaoh. He's now one of the pharaohs. And on their money, they even give him the ram's horn, which is to say he is now signified as the God ruler of Egypt. He left Alexandria and he made his way back to the Middle East again, where Darius is going to meet him in battle, but he will see how strong Alexander is in Gaugamela, that his own soldiers, Xerxes' own soldiers, are going to assassinate him and present his body to Alexander the Great. Not only does Alexander the Great move so quickly from place to place to place, as I said, 13 years, he's going to die at the age of 33, but he knows that there are so many people in the Persian army that were Greeks and Macedonians that were taken as slaves. So all of these people are willing to do away with Xerxes. They want this Greek Macedonian to be their king, and they crown him king, essentially. He continues until he gets to the capital, which is Persepolis, Tehran, and he does what every foolish person does, is they burn down this glorious temple, which you can see the remains of on the internet everywhere, even today. But before they burned it down, they had loaded up 1,000 camels, mules, and horses to take back the wealth of this territory of the king of Persia. He wasn't finished yet. He wanted to do more conquering. His ego continued to grow with every conquest, and now he was even going to take his men to India. And that is, unfortunately, when it was going to be his last stand. At the age of 33, he was either poisoned or died of alcohol poisoning, as he was a heavy drinker. No one knows exactly, but everyone certainly knows that Alexander the Great, 1 month short of 33 years, was dead. And the shock waves throughout the region were understandably tremendous. What was going to happen to this enormous region was, let's not forget what is happening here and why this part of the world became such an economic power. And you can't be a political power without being an economic power. The economic stuff comes first. Then you have political prestige. This place, this territory, as vast as it was, one of the reasons that it became such a powerhouse is because Alexander the Great tied all of these disparate nationalities together under one language. Wherever his men went, they, as I said to you, were instituting schools, gymnasiums, educational centers, theaters, everything that goes along with our modern life and entertainment in the humanities was going on here. And the only way that he could make all of this come together was to insist that there be one world language for that territory. It's called a lingua franca. Today, the lingua franca of the world is American English. He tied everyone together in this way, so much so that the Jews were so happy to be living here and having the quality of life that they did as merchants and educators and scholars and jewelers and everything else imaginable. They liked it so much that they completely forgot how to speak Aramaic, and the first Torah had to be written in Koine Greek. Koine Greek was like a non-accented English, if you will, kind of this kind of specific dialect of Greek. And when Alexander, and everything is done here, the merchants in the city, the people that work in markets, the philosophers, the artisans, the people writing theater, they're all using Koine Greek. Every other language you can speak at home, but this is the national language. And when he dies at the age of 33, before he passes away, they say, well, who are you going to leave this great dynasty to? He says, to the strongest general, which at that point creates civil war among his generals. And of course, this leads to lots and lots of problems. Though we have a lot of many people in this part of the world, many acres of people that are speaking the same language, kind of adhering to the same ideas. They're all being inculcated into this way of life. And all of this is being pursued by stories in theater. The theater was the original Google. This is where you went to get all your information. This is where news was broadcast. This is where tragedians told their stories in plays, where the psychology of the individual is discussed, where great debates go on, where people can participate in democracy. And it didn't even work in just one way. Those people that were Greeks that later became the Greek philosophers known as Cynics or Epicureans or Stoics are taking from the ideas that come from the Buddha and Zoroastrianism, because they have the Buddha now dressed in Greek robes. And next to him is this body beautiful Greek madness. So it was indeed a cross-cultural hybrid humanities curriculum. This is the way it was presented. This is how life should be, and this is how we live it to its best end. In addition to that, the city of Alexandria, of which its population was extensive, and 40% of the population was Jewish, the general that managed to commandeer this territory was the most powerful, because not only does he have access to wheat fields and the riches of this world, which was enormously wealthy, the pharaohs, but he is one of the commanders, one of the generals in the Alexander the Great's army, who wants to have the Old Testament translated into Koine Greek. And he is the one that oversees the building of this enormous library, which had something like 700,000 scrolls, maps, and documents of various kinds. He is Antiochus, and the law was that if you came to this city-state, if you came to the this was a great center of commerce because you have the lighthouse here, many ships. This is a very, very wealthy city because of the commerce and trade in the waterways. The law here is that irrespective of how many documents you have on your ship, you have to turn everything in to the hundreds of scholars that are working in the Alexandria Library. You have to give them the original document, probably made on vellum or maybe papyrus. And the scholars make a copy, an exact copy, and they give it back to you. But they keep the original. This is how insanely devoted they were to education and scholarship. So not only do we have this Greek way of life in which all of these things are kind of put forth, but they also use art to teach you who you should be in this world to have the best life experience you can possibly have. And what is one of those ways to be? They show you right here in the contrapposto stance that they invented. You should be a man that stands firm in your ideas, but always be willing to bend. If you represent something of great importance, stand for it. Our Greek goddess stands for liberty. If you are a lawgiver, if you are a person that is integral in overseeing government, if you oversee justice, you adjudicate justice in this world, you must sit because you have a lot to think about and ponder. But since he does not have a leg to stand on, we can see that he uses his hands. One hand is firm and the other one is open to discussion. If you want to lead a balanced life, again, you see, they are being influenced by what they learned in the East. A balanced life. If you lead a balanced life, you're not too temperamental. You do things in the middle. You live in balance. How much more balanced was the Parthenon? How could it even be more balanced? Everything was equal. Everything was decorated in this love for excellence. The craftsmen did excellent work. The sculptors, the designers, the painters, the people that went about exalting the Greek world were simply telling the world that you have possibility. They want to embrace secularism of all stripes. Because education and life experience, all of these ideas can make your life so rich. Well, that's the way the world essentially went. The problem was that there was a constant battle over Egypt and this territory. And so at some points, it's Antiochus. At some points, it's the pharaohs and the Ptolemies that are winning. And by the time that the Hanukkah story takes place, it is Antiochus that has become the more powerful, and he has taken over this part of the world where the Jewish temple is. The Ptolemies are the ones that are here. So the next time that a question comes up on Jeopardy, was Cleopatra Greek or Egyptian? You know that she was Greek. She was of Greek extraction because of the man that commandeered this territory. These were, let me see. Oh, it's Alexandria. So this must be the Seleucid Empire, and this is the Antiochus territory. Yeah, Antiochus, and this is the Seleucid Empire. At this time, though, mind you, time goes on because this Hellenization of this part of the world continued for many hundreds of years. And because it did, at a certain point, Rome is going to become more powerful than the Antiochus that is in place at that time, which is around 2,000 years ago, around the time well, this is 100 years BCE, so it's a little bit before the time of Jesus. 100 years BCE, we have one of the Antiochus rulers here, and this Roman general has drawn a line in the sand in which he says to Antiochus, I will take your territory and you will let me do so. I will let you think about it before you cross the line in the sand. Sure enough, he had to give up his territory, not without a huge fight, but he certainly did. So the war that began to take place did a lot of destruction, and Antiochus IV came back to Jerusalem. He was terribly jarred by what had just happened, and the Jews in Jerusalem are now fighting over who is going to become Hellenized and who isn't. Now, as it happens, the father of Judas Maccabee was a man that lived outside of Jerusalem. They lived kind of in the countryside, and they start to attack the cosmopolitan Jews that are living in Jerusalem and that have control over the temple. And they start to call these kind of guerrilla warfare incursions in which they don't have too many men, but they can come and do a lot of damage to the temple and to Jewish people in Jerusalem that want to inculcate themselves and their children in the Greek way of life. Why it became so troublesome at this point, because it had been going on for hundreds of years, was now the Kohanim, the rabbis and the teachers were more than willing to go Greek all the way. So these are the people that, the same thing happens in every country. Those people that live in the countryside, those people that live in the center of the United States tend to be red states because they don't want the expansion of their culture. They don't see it that way. They see it as themselves disappearing. Judah Maccabee, of course, becomes this great warrior that is supporting the Jewish world, but it got much more complicated than that. And in fact, at the end of the day, the Maccabees essentially became the enemies of the Jewish world. But the point is that at this time in history, Judah Maccabee, the Jews that are fighting to protect it as a religion, are the ones that become the great heroes in Jewish folklore. Judah Maccabee, I don't know how they brought elephants from India to fight, or maybe this is, again, kind of anecdotal, we don't know, but we certainly do know that there was a lot of destruction that took place. That great opera, Nabucco, is the story of the Jews singing about Nebuchadnezzar, letting them come back to build their second temple. And now their second temple is going to be destroyed. Well, the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah celebrates the fact that there was oil that burned in the Jewish temple so it could be cleansed, and all of these things that we know about Hanukkah. And also we eat foods that are made in oil in celebration of that. But there was simply no way to keep a good idea down. The whole world, well, we can say a lot of things about the whole world that's Western, has adopted these amazing ideas, but we know that Israel is the only country in the Middle East that is in fact totally Hellenistic. It's the only country. All the other countries around it are living like it's 1,000 years ago in the Dark Ages. We have been Hellenized from the get-go. and we stand up for its ideals. The Greek philosophy of humanism embraced critical thinking, evidence, rationalism, and empiricism over acceptance of strict religious dogma or superstition. Humanism affirms a notion of human freedom and progress. It promotes the development of individuals and emphasizes a concern for man in relation to the world. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, I would love to hear it. I can unmute you all if you'd like, or you can unmute yourself, I believe. Oh, for some reason, I think you have to unmute yourself. All right, so anybody want to make a comment?
Hi, Bela. This was my first Bela Zoom, and I just want to say I loved it, and I'm going to be there for all of them to the best of my ability. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, Bela, it's Joyce.
Yes, dear.
You know, I always consider myself very well educated until I hear one of your lectures. And I didn't realize you did this over Zoom, and I would very much like to be included on your next one.
Thank you.
I really feel like I look at art so differently just from having listened to you. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm delighted. That's my raison d'être. Right? It's my reason for being, is to enlighten and help people enjoy life even more. Yes, ma'am.
Your Zoom meetings are so informative. It's like you think you know, but then you realize you don't. And
Well, mind you, I do the same thing you do. I read lots and lots and lots of things, and then this is what comes out as critical points to make. So that's the part of the humanities that is known as rhetoric. I am making an argument for you to think about these things the way I do, simply because it's only my point of view, but I think it has elements of truth in it, and therefore they're meaningful.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Well, I thank you very kindly for spending your time with me. You could be out shopping. You could be out doing whatever you want to do, but here you are spending time with me. I just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All the best. Happy holidays. Some of you I'm going to see for Picasso and Matisse in about 12 days. So I look forward to that.
Me too.
You. God bless you. See you, Lisa, in a little while. Bye, sweethearts. Be well.